Hello and welcome to the great outdoors. I'm out this morning looking for subject matter for the next video. I'm just going to turn the camera around so that you can see what I'm looking at.
That's a really complicated pattern of twigs. I'm absolutely loving that green colour though. And looking straight into the sun, that pattern of shadows on the ground cast by the trees. Lovely composition. Yesterday I'd taken a photograph of a silver birch tree with ice in the field, which is a lovely, I like that composition too. It's perhaps a little bit simpler. So I went to take a photograph of it in the sunlight just to see what difference it made. I don't think it's quite as clear somehow as it was in that more diffused light.
Here's the colour photograph I took yesterday when the day was cloudy and the sun wasn't bright. It's created an image that's a bit calmer and less contrasty. I have edited it into black and white as well, into grayscale I should say, which helps me to see the tonal values. Sometimes when looking at a colour photograph, all the colour can be quite confusing when you're learning to pick out the darkest darks and the lightest lights. So the edit into black and white can be really helpful. A bundle of drawing pencils, mostly 2Bs, 3Bs, there's an HB there, see, that shouldn't be in here, in the wrong set. 3B, and then there were a couple of B pencils, and I just decided to explore these two B pencils. One's a Derwent and one is, I don't know, it's an unknown make. This just says artist's pencil. So I just wanted to explore the range of tones I can get out of these two B pencils. It's difficult to say that without it sounding like two B pencils. They're not, they're B pencils and there are two of them. That's the unknown make. Doing a bit of mark making here just to explore how they feel. Best thing to help you to decide which pencil to use is to just do a little bit of shading like this. Maybe try some lines out, different pressures, different grips. Just try and find which pencil feels right for you. Which do you fancy using? You can change your mind part way through, of course, if the pencil you've picked isn't doing the job for you. Very little between them, but I think the artist's pencil of the unknown make is the one that I just feel like using today. It's a little bit, this Derwent pencil, which I would expect, is a little bit finer. The graphite in it is smoother, but I quite like the gritty almost texture of this artist's pencil. Okay, I've done a little bit of an exploration over here, looking at the structure of the composition and just beginning to lock in some shapes and think about, I'm just sort of feeling my way around the composition at the moment. So I'm looking at, for example, how the top of the tree is pretty much central to that top section, that top line that defines the photograph there. So drawing like this means that you're not worried about getting things in the right place, so to speak, to begin with, but it's just really, all I can describe it as is feeling my way around. And here's a really dark patch. I think that's really going to be the darkest key in terms of tone, and this is the lightest. So all the shades of grey are going to be between this brightest bright and this darkest dark. And one of the useful things to think about when you're composing a picture is where the lightest light and the darkest dark are, and quite often if they're close to each other they create an attention grabbing space, so the person who looks at the picture will tend to look at the area where there's most contrast. So this darkest dark and brightest bright being really close together here, they're going to sort of provide a focal point. I really like the way this grassy area, this dark grassy area, and the edge of the ice, the snowy surface of the field, makes this, they get a kind of a zigzag shape going through. It comes along here, zigzags round this way, and then it levels off into that distant edge of the field. Not the horizon quite, because the horizon's beyond there through the trees, but the edge of the field is my main horizontal division. And again, when I was cropping the photograph, I made sure that this line was a third of the way down. So if you divide this side into 3, this line is a third of the way. So 1, 2, 3. Could actually bring the bottom of the picture a bit further down to make it the same ratio as that. This page just enables me to think about things like that, the shape of the rectangle, where the lightest areas and the darkest areas are going to be. If I'm happy with the composition. And the last thing I will put in when I do the finished drawing is all these twigs. Perhaps it's the first thing you see when you look at the photograph is all that detail. It can be a little bit overwhelming, but if you don't look too hard to begin with, if you look with a relaxed eye, keep your photograph sort of away from you, perhaps not too close to you, and just almost unfocus your eyes if you can to simplify what you're looking at. You can come in closer and look at the detail maybe if you're going to do a longer finished piece of work. And when you get to the end you want to put the detail in, you might want to see exactly what you're putting in. But at this stage I'm just looking for blocks. I love the way this tree, it's dark at the bottom and then there's this bright patch of snow. Let's just clean that up. It's really bright there and here. So the dark part of the tree and the bright patch of snow contrast with each other, and then up here the darker trees beyond, they're darker than the field, but they're not as dark as this area, but they show up the lightness of the trunk. And then when it's against the sky up here, where the sky's really bright, it looks dark again. So that's going to be lovely to play with in the drawing. So 5 minutes on this kind of exploratory art making, knowing that it's not going to be the finished picture. Maybe enable you to be a bit more free, loose with your drawing. Decide which pencil you want to use. I'm just going to go in with that Derwent pencil. Maybe that will give me a bit more subtlety. Yeah, I'll probably go with this one. Tendency to start getting involved in some of the more detailed aspects of this drawing, so probably a good time to stop and begin a more considered piece of work on the next page. So what I'll do is I'll measure and mark out the rectangle based on this composition, and come back to you when everything's ready to go. So you can see I've marked out the rectangle in the same ratio as the rectangle of the photograph, and I've also marked in some points around the side which will help you to see how I'm putting in the proportions of the composition. So halfway across the top, as I said before, is where the tree disappears out of the top of the picture on the halfway point. This section here and this one here, so the horizontal line at the edge of the field falls on a third of the way down, as we measured before. The dark part of the tree is about a third of the way from the bottom, so it's going to be about here in this area. And then the snowy line disappears out of the photograph on the halfway point. I actually took a ruler and measured all these against the photograph. It was quite interesting to find how simple the composition is in a way, and it's this contrasty area of lightest light and darkest dark that falls in this sort of third to half section here. From this point, this is going to be the focal point of the picture, which as you move around the composition, you might follow this zigzag, your eye will keep being attracted back to this area of high contrast. So start where you feel like, whichever lines you find most helpful to put in first, and for me it's the edge of the field, followed by I'm going to put a line sort of through the middle of the tree rather than trying to draw each side of it. So, and it comes in at a slight angle. So it crosses the horizontal line, not on the middle. So if it was coming straight down, it would cross at the middle here, but it crosses to the right of the middle. It's not on a third, but it's certainly well away from the halfway point. And we come down here to this third, which is going to be that darkest area there. And the next area I want to define is this sort of curving edge to the icy area. And that far edge, which has lots of interesting texture to it. So I suppose you could say these are the main lines of composition. They delineate all the most important areas. Let's just get the top of these trees in as well. It's hard to see which is distant trees and which is all the twigs coming down from the silver birch tree. They sort of blend in together. Got a different quality, that line. Much less defined. Now I could try and draw a little bit of the left-hand profile of the trunk. Yeah. And then the right. Really start to notice things as you begin to develop the drawing in a slower, more considered way. Like that little, there's a little nook there, which I find rather attractive, and to enjoy shading that and differentiating the shadow here from the tone of the grass. And I can see that the edge of the snow is going to need to come somewhat lower down than I thought there. Not quite the same shape as I initially put in. But of course the eraser, the different erasers are going to be as important drawing tools as the pencil is. So here, around this area, I shall be putting in the white of the snow by using the eraser later on in the drawing. And this line down the middle of the tree will disappear, and these lines that cross over the trunk will be erased. It's quite an important branch, that little, maybe it's going to be higher up, I'm not sure. Let's need to make sure that the tops of the distant trees leave a little gap between this branch and the tops of the trees. There's a little area of sky just here. I want to make sure I've considered. And of course this has got great character, this branch, which is quite foreshortened. Its curves are much more curvy. This branch curves very gently. It's going out sort of, it's coming in this way. That one I think is bending round and going, it's coming round the trunk and going away from us. So the curves actually look much more curvy. More curvy curves, because each section of that little branch is foreshortened as it goes away. So I'm holding the pencil right away from the mark making end when I'm shading. I've got my little finger resting on the board. It just kind of stabilises everything. It's quite interesting to watch how you draw, but you tend not to. You don't tend to look at yourself unless you're trying to explain to somebody what you're doing. It is quite useful to be aware of these things. You can sort of, if I've not got my hand anchored to the page, I will make much larger marks and be more loose perhaps. If I'm starting to want a little bit more control, I will anchor my hand down. It varies, it depends on what you're wanting to do. been working on this drawing for about 25 minutes now, and I think there's at least an hour more drawing to be done on it. So I'm going to walk away, give it a rest, do something else, and then when I come back I'll be able to see more clearly what I need to do to it. So I'll film it through to completion and you'll be able to see it in part 2.